Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm Joe Taylor. This morning, another in the ongoing series of programs presented by the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning. The program, through the Northwest Institute of Research, oversees a grant from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning at the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. The goal of the program is to improve the outcomes for young children as they prepare for school. John Posa is a community partner specialist for the program, and he's here with us throughout the series. John, we have a guest on this morning from the West Coast, I understand.
Yes, Joe, actually from the state of Arizona. We have Dr. Jill Stamm, who is the co-founder of the New Directions Institute for Infant Brain Development and an associate clinical professor at Arizona State University in the Department of Psychology in Education. Dr. Stamm is an author and an international speaker on early brain development and the connection of healthy brain growth to later learning and school achievement. For those who follow Dr. Stamm, she's regularly featured in Parenting Magazine and in various newspaper and magazine publications. Welcome to the program, Dr. Stamm.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Well, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is, in all of your research and the work that you do with early brain development, what are some of the most practical ways that we can help parents listening to the program and child care providers of children birth to age 5 in terms of enriching their brain development at an early age?
I think one of the first and most important things is to validate that most parents and most caregivers really have very good instincts when it comes to young children. And with all of the new research that is out on how brains actually develop, it can be pretty scary, I think. Parents hear public service announcements that use figures that 90% of a child's brain is developed before they go to kindergarten, and that can really capture someone's attention, but it can cause a lot of worry. So the first thing is many of the things that we do by instinct, by training, by watching other caregivers is really pretty good. One of the things, though, that we want to emphasize is we can go beyond what our instincts are telling us and validate and try to understand why certain kinds of interactions and relationship building is so critical to protect the brain, to keep it healthy, and to allow it to grow to the maximum potential for every child, whatever that might be. So there are lots of specific things, and what we've been doing at our organization is really trying to simplify and be specific about 3 different things. One is, we call them the ABCs of early learning: attention, bonding, and communication. So we give strategies and the reasons why for each in each one of those 3 domains.
Now, we've talked a lot about brain development and research on our programs in the past, and I know that you work a lot with what you call cornerstone institutions in offering workshops and providing information for parents. Could you talk a little bit about those cornerstone institutions and how they are important in getting the message out?
Yes. Well, what we know about adult learning is that repeated exposure to an idea can help us to pay more attention. We as adults are bombarded with so much input that sometimes it's hard to get our attention. So cornerstone institutions, as we've defined them, are institutions that have been in a community, will be in a community for many years to come, such as hospitals, public libraries, public schools, and community centers, as well as faith-based organizations. So what we've been able to do here in Arizona is to provide the same kind of information in those multiple places, so that a parent is first of all, getting this information in a workshop that we hold right in the hospitals here in Arizona. So there's a 4-hour, and this is the only one that's a lecture. There's a 4-hour lecture that brand new parents and their families, all of the members of their families, grandmas and grandpas and everybody can come. They're always free, thanks to some grants that we have here in Arizona. And so they come for a 4-hour little lecture on how a baby's brain actually develops. Then they run into the same information when they go to the public libraries, because we have programs here in about 96 of the libraries in Arizona called Brain Time, which is just like story time for families, except the focus is on the child's brain and on the parent-child interactions that occur that you can stimulate the development of the brain. And then we do these same things, as I was saying, in faith-based and now finally in public schools. Not that the public schools have a mandate for K-12 education, but we all know that children who enter kindergarten with more self-regulation skills and more social, emotional development as well as cognitive development really do better throughout the entire spectrum of education. So the schools are now allowing us to come in and provide fun workshops for parents that actually show them a toy or some books or some interaction patterns that we know, that scientists know, are really good for a child's brain. So the parent is really getting this information in a couple of different places, and they finally say, I think this must be important. I'm hearing it from the hospital. I'm running into it here. I'm running into it there. And so it's repeated exposure for the parents, really.
If I can, building on what you just said and asking kind of every man, or I guess in this case, every grandparent, every parent question, practically speaking, what can parents and grandparents do to foster this? What types of play, what types of other activities?
So one of the best kinds of activities for a child sort of throughout the age span would be reading books to children. Sitting with board books initially when the child is really pretty young, 6, 8 months old through a year and a half or something, sitting and reading really simple books, not to teach reading. This is not about, and a lot of parents are like, gosh, I'm not such a great reader myself. This isn't about reading. It's really about language exposure and just introducing a child to the idea that pictures and words that are in books convey some meaning. So, in other words, you could have just a very simple picture book that had some yellow ducks, and then there was a yellow lemon and a little yellow plastic car, just big, clear pictures of those things. And it's really about what the parent is talking about as they point to a picture. So they might point to the picture of the yellow car and say to their 7-month-old that they're holding in their lap, Mommy had a yellow car when I was just first learning to drive. Oh, my goodness, did I love that car. But it was pretty old. And in other words, you're just elaborating and using language, pointing to objects where children begin to understand that these pictures of things have stories that go with them. And it's really about the number of words that child is hearing in that loving environment where they're sort of bathed in the fun of sitting on grandma's lap or something, and that the baby or the child can sort of feel the breath of that grandparent on their head, So what they start to do is associate all this sort of wonderful feeling and fun and interesting things with a book. And if you can accomplish that for a young child, you've gone a long way to helping that child's intellectual development.
Absolutely.
I want to ask a real quick follow-up on that. Parents, especially mothers, multitasking, working outside the home, so busy these days, how can they be sure to give the child the attention he or she needs to develop intelligence in the limited time that they have? I mean, this all sounds great, but even to some people, 15, 20 minutes is a lot of time. Obviously, it's important. Any suggestions on how to actually get it done?
Well, You're right. I mean, if you have really limited time, spending it just doing, face-to-face loving interactions is probably your best bet, and you can accomplish that, as I said, looking at a book together. But I get it. Today's moms and dads both work sometimes 2 jobs, and just to provide for their family. And it is a haunting and difficult task. In this country, we need to do a better job to help all parents. So what I would say to that parent is make sure, because, the 15 or 20 minutes that you have to spend with them is wonderful, and it's important. But it's really important who you have taking care of your child during the day. I mean, a day is a long time. Having the child really looking at your options. And as I said, in this country, we really need to broaden these options. But it might be that instead of going to a fancy child care center that looks like it has all the bells and whistles, is really to look at how long the caregivers remain in that environment. Because it's really about the relationships between a caregiver, whether it's the lady down the street or someone in a child care or child development center. You want to look for the least turnover. I think that would be my primary question that I would want to ask after safety. I mean, basic safety for your child, of course, sort of trumps everything. But the next question would be to look at turnover. If it's my baby, I want my baby to know this person that's caring for them all day, because it's through that primary relationship that the brain begins to, develop and unfold and really wire up well. It's in relationships.
Dr. Stam, we have a couple of questions here from our listeners, and let's take this first one.
Hi, Dr. Stam. This is Terry from Bedford. Can you give us some practical ways that parents and caregivers of children birth to 5 can apply your research on brain development in their interactions with children?
Yes, of course, it depends, Terry, on the age of the child. But, for example, let's start with an infant. Some of the things that you can do to stimulate the maximum brain development would be things that would involve both hemispheres of the brain. It sounds complicated, but something as simple as crawling for a 7-8-month-old baby is doing exactly that. So for the caregivers of infants, I would say make sure that the child has a lot of tummy time. Do things that is going to have that child on their tummy a lot, developing the musculature that you need for crawling, because it's really the crawling which is utilizing, crossing the midline of the body and using the right arm when the left leg is moving and the left arm when the right leg is moving. Those sort of cross-lateral kinds of things physically that children do help to develop the communication, I guess I want to say, between the 2 hemispheres. That helps a child to establish a finely developed brain.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, doctor.
Yeah, and then, for toddlers, the toddlers is all about, sort of cause and effect. If I do this, this happens. And what is the consequence of that? So I would be doing lots of things that show children in ways that they can influence the outcome. And so there's a lot of just stacking of blocks and putting things in and out of containers, and a lot of what we call dump and fill kinds of activities. Dump everything out and then put it all back. Those kinds of things begin to establish some cause and effect kinds of things in the brain, which is also a really good pattern to start to establish.
Okay, we have a question now from
Yvonne.
Hi,
Yvonne.
Dr. Stam, this is Yvonne from Du Bois. What can we do in childcare to support young children that may have experienced trauma in the home?
Well, for trauma-exposed children of any age, a consistent pattern of interaction is really critical. Not only patterns of interaction, but patterns of scheduling of what's going to happen next in their life. Children who experience early trauma are always concerned about what's going to happen next because bad things have happened to them next. So whatever you can do in your environment to reassure them of what, by having schedules, by having routines, by having logical consequences to things, really helps to repair, and sometimes it's a really long process to repair a child's brain that has experienced a lot of trauma. It is also, again, in that primary relationship, they have to learn to trust again. If you've been hurt by an adult ever in your life, you need time to establish trust so that you know that that person is never going to hurt you.
Dr. Stam, you mentioned, I know a lot of the everyday things that child care providers and parents use, from books to various toys. You have a program that you actually call the Brain Boxes. And isn't that kind of what you were talking about before in our use of those and how we can effectively encourage and work with brain development in children with the Brain Boxes?
Yes, we created the Brain Boxes. It's a patented product, if you will, for all the entire age spectrum, from birth to 5.5 years old. So there's 12 different boxes that are filled with not fancy gizmos at all, not computers and things, but basic child development toys and books. But critically, we have included in these boxes the explanations of why. Why do you play with why do you do tracking with a very young infant? Why? The example that I gave earlier about why is crawling important? Why is reading to a child important? It gives the answers of what's going on inside the child's brain that would cause us to want to do that. And it's not about the object or that specific book or that specific toy. It's about what that toy can represent. And so we get down to really practical things. It's very hard, I know, for a parent to understand a lot of the scientific concepts of brain development. But if you can really begin in a play setting, play is really important in a child's life. And it's important in a child's life because of the relationship between play and learning. A lot of people in the field of early development, early education, have always known that play is important. But the reason why it's important is that there's actually chemicals in the brain that are activated when there's a pleasure center in the brain, right, which releases chemicals when something feels good. And if something feels good and you're having fun and you're enjoying it, the brain actually is saying, hey, let's do that again. And it's actually the doing it again that causes the learning. Does that make sense? So it's not the play itself, but the play activates those parts of the brain that say, I want to repeat this. I want to do it again and again and again. Some of us as caregivers are like, I can't believe you want to do this again.
Reading the story again for the umpteenth time in a row.
Yes. You've read this story to the child 30 times, and you're like, oh my gosh, why does he want to do it again? The brain says, I like this. And it's through repetition that the brain circuits are strengthened. And that's what causes learning, is these highly elaborated and strengthened brain circuits. It really is about the brain.
It's pretty much acknowledged that people have different types of intelligence. For some, it's verbal or even mechanical. Do you find that infants are already predisposed to one or another type of intelligence? And if they are, should a parent try to, through early activities, maybe increase the intellect in areas in which they may seem weak?
Well, I would say, first of all, the child, if a child, lots of children don't really have strong preferences. I think sometimes those preferences get established because the child notices maybe that the parent enjoys doing those kinds of activities,
Right.
So they're like, okay, well, I think I want to do that too, So those preferences can be balanced out, as you were saying. To specifically expose children to multiple ways of learning, multiple experiences, and then really watching. Parents can learn an awful lot by old-fashioned really looking at the child. What do they really like? What are they really good at? And providing those opportunities, of course, and then trying to balance it. Again, I think there's a lot of really, in this newfangled world of ours with all of our gizmos, there's a lot of old-fashioned, common sense approaches that work very nicely with children, if you're watching.
Well, I have to ask you something about the New Directions Institute.
Yeah.
What is the latest cutting-edge research that is taking place that maybe you can tell us a little bit about now on infant brain development?
Well, we're really looking at because parents are asking all the time about computers and technology, particularly, the smartphones and the iPads and so on.
Right.
Parents notice that children really gravitate to them, and they want to understand why. And is it good? Is it bad? I mean, what is that? What is the judgment that we need to be looking at to encourage or discourage? First of all, I don't think you can really discourage something in a child when you as the parent are doing it all the time. So if you're on your iPhone all day long, you don't have to introduce that to the child. The child automatically knows that this is an important thing because it's important to you as the parent. So, but what some of the latest research is showing is some caution to a parent, not so much by what the child is doing with a computer or with the iPhone, but looking at the parent-child relationship and how often the parent is actually not paying attention to the child because I am paying attention to my Facebook or to my emails. Catherine Steiner Adair is a researcher in the Boston area at Harvard, and she has a affiliation with the medical school. It's a pretty strong admonition that we really need to watch out what we're doing with our use of computers. It disconnects. When I get a little ping on my phone that tells me that I have a message, a very young child, a 7, 8, 10-month-old child, already understands that little ping means mom is going to disconnect.
Yeah, Dr. Stam,
Yes.
Our time has just flown.
We have to disconnect.
Yes, we have to disconnect,
I'm
unfortunately. But it's been fascinating. We really enjoyed having you on our program. And please come back again.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
And that's our program for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks at this same time. In the meantime, you can go online to learn more at papromiseforchildren.com. For John Posa and the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning, I'm Joe Taylor. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.